Okay, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to the Public Record Office in Northern Ireland on a really cold day. So thank you for those who made it in. My name is Stephen Scarth, I'm Head of Public Services. It's my pleasure to open today's event, which is to mark 200 years of Ordnance Survey 200. And I'll just tell you a bit about the format of this morning, of the day. We're going to have a presentation by colleagues from HERoNI, the Historic Environment Record of Northern Ireland, who are part of the Historic Environment Division. And that will be followed by a break around about 3 o'clock. And then we'll break for about 20 minutes or so. And then we'll come back again, and I'm going to take you through PRONI's map viewer, and then we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Suzanne McLaughlin, the Director of Mapping and Chief Survey Officer of OSNI, and then we hope to break about 4:20. Now, we're also having a part 2 this evening, and we'd be delighted if any of you, or as many of you, would come along to that as possible. And we're really pleased to be hosting the Royal Geographic Society's annual lecture, which will take place at 7:30. Before that talk takes place at 7:30, there'll be a wine reception at 7, and maybe some peanuts and crisps and things. And we will also be launching the OS200 exhibition next door, and Making Maps exhibition, which is also next door. So that's what you get, 2 exhibition launches for the price of 1. So that's a bit the shape of the day. So before I ask Rosemary and Hannah and then Kerrie to come up, I just want to say some bits of housekeeping. Could you just put your phones to silent? And if you want to take a call, feel free to take a call, but just outside. PRONI doesn't, there's no parking for Titanic Boulevard. So any cars outside, their parking display. There's no planned fire alarm. In the event an alarm happens, just follow the staff, and we congregate at the apartments at Queen's, the other side of Queen's Road. And finally, this is one of many events that both PRONI and HERoNI organise in this building over the course of the year. We both have newsletters on which you can sign up to. I would love to see you at future events. So that's my introduction's finished. So can I ask Rosemary and Hannah to come up and introduce this. Also, I want to get the title right. Charting Our Past, the Creation of the Northern Ireland State and Monuments Record. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to try to take a very quick sprint through just talking a wee bit about the Sites and Monuments Record, how it was created. It's going to be a gallop through because the time is very short. But if I can just get the slide. For anybody who's not familiar with Historic Environment Division, 4 of its core responsibilities, roles, are to record, protect, conserve, and promote the historic environment. I'm not going to really go into any more detail than that. Obviously, there's a wide range of activities that take place involving those things that we do. HERoNI, the Historic Environment Record of Northern Ireland, is a branch or subsection of HED, and its role is to maintain and develop the records. We have several records, different kinds of records and collections in HERoNI, but I'm just going to concentrate on the Sites and Monuments Record, which is one of them. So HERoNI it's not just an archive, it's actually a living record. It grows and develops as new information comes to light and we learn new things about sites and monuments. I've been around the record for a very long time, but to understand how it developed in the first place, you have got to go back 100 years. I'm not quite that old. And this is just a snapshot. I'll just pick out a few aspects and particularly acknowledge the huge debt that we owe to the Ordnance Survey, because they really have been weaving in and out of all the work that we do. So after partition in 1922, there were a few monuments in the north that had been in the guardianship of the Irish Board of Works. They were handed over to the Ministry of Finance to maintain them. There weren't very many funds. For one of the reports that I read was that there were 19 records and £19 to maintain them. I don't know if that was somebody being literal or just making a point, but definitely they weren't very luxurious funds for looking after the monuments. And they probably weren't very high on the priority list of the Ministry of Finance. But there were a group of people in the country who were very interested in the archaeology, passionate about it. They did most of the research and excavation that was done, and they were members of the local societies and clubs, like the Irish Naturalist Field Club, or the Belfast Naturalist Field Club, the Belfast Natural History and Philosophical Society, and the Royal Irish Academy. And they were becoming concerned, probably for a long time were concerned, when they saw a lot of monuments disappearing from the landscape. One example was Dromina Castle. When a group of people from one of the societies went out to visit it, they discovered that the landowner was in the process of negotiating to sell it, because road contractors were very keen to get their hands on monuments. They could dismantle them, crush up the stone to use for road metal. So they were buying up monuments, and the monuments, once they're gone, that's it. So they were concerned about that. And one that was even worse than that, in a way, because that one was rescued, Dromina was rescued in the nick of time. Clough or Clough-Galdana Castle in County Antrim, it was not so fortunate, because it was reported that 90 feet of mock material had been removed to put on the roads, and the stone castle itself, as you can see, it's not in very good shape, but it was in the process of being blasted for stone. Builders were also very keen to get their hands on the stone to incorporate it into various buildings that were going up at the time. So what the people from the various societies got together and formed a delegation, and they presented their case to the Ministry of Finance and said, we need to do something about this, or we would like to do something about this. I don't think they were too bossy about it, but the result of it was that Ancient Monuments Act Northern Ireland was passed in 1926. And under that, one of the conditions of that act was that the Ministry of Finance got an advisory committee, later changed its name to a council, advisory council, but they were able to support and provide expert advice to the ministry, and they also took on responsibility, because under Section 5, selected monuments could be protected by scheduling, and so the advisory committee took responsibility for undertaking those things. Scheduling just means, it just meant that landowners who intended to alter or demolish anything had to give a period of notice, so that the monument could be fully and properly recorded if any changes were going to be made to it. But in order for the monuments to be protected, they had to know what they had and where they were, and nobody had made an exhaustive list of monuments in the landscape. So where would they start to find these? Some of the monuments had been targeted for research and excavation by the members of the societies and the committee, but they didn't know the overview from county to county what existed. The only records that did exist were the work of the Ordnance Survey fieldmen. In the course of mapping the county series editions, they had encountered monuments in the landscape and they mapped them, which was really good for finding them again because they put them in the right place. And at the same time, they created Ordnance Survey fieldmen's reports, which gave little synopsis of the various sites and monuments in the landscape. So Captain Carlisle, who had been the superintendent of the Ordnance Survey, he kindly arranged to have these fieldmen's reports copied, and he handed over 2,073 OS fieldmen's reports to the Ministry of Finance, to the committee, and from that they were able to use those records to create a list of monuments that they needed to visit. They did need to visit them because they didn't want to schedule something that had already been demolished. They wanted to make sure that it was still there, so they had to set out across the landscape to record as many monuments as they could. Oliver Davies at that time was a lecturer in classical archaeology and ancient history, but he got very interested in the local archaeology, and he covered a lot of the sites in County Tyrone, visiting, recording them. It was said that he rode around the countryside on a bright green bicycle, and the police thought he was a German spy because he was observed in areas where there were no hotels, and people wondered, what is he doing, roaming around? Sorry, going too far. It was a labour of love by the advisory committee because they didn't have great funding for this work. They were trying to visit as many monuments as they could with their own money, basically. It was entirely voluntary. I don't think there were even enough funds to cover their expenses. Maisie Gaffigan there on the right, she had a car, and she apparently drove thousands of miles driving Eston Evans around the country. She probably drove other people too because there weren't very many cars in those days. But the result of that work that they did was a publication called A Preliminary Survey of Ancient Monuments of Northern Ireland. And so you could say that the work of the Ordnance Survey plus the work done by the committee was really the foundation or the embryonic version of what we know today as the Sites and Monuments Record. In 1950, the Ministry of Finance employed two full-time archaeologists, Dudley Waterman and Pat Collins, to form the Archaeological Survey of Northern Ireland, and their job was to go into more detail, county by county, and to record the monuments for each county. They started with County Down. Around the same time that this department was created, Queen's established the Department of Archaeology, and the person that they appointed as the lecturer, his services were shared between the Ministry of Finance and Queen's. So he was involved in this work as well. And 1966, they published an archaeological survey of County Down, and it is much coveted publication even now. So the Archaeological Survey back in the 1950s and through probably part of the 60s was based at Queen's, but in the 1970s, under the umbrella of the Department of Environment, it moved across to the old PRONI. They occupied a wing of the old PRONI offices on Balmoral Avenue. And that it was then in the mid-1970s that the Sites and Monuments Record was born as we know it today. Anne Given was the record officer for the Archaeological Survey, and she really carried out much of the foundational work of that, using the preliminary survey of ancient monuments. And again, the Ordnance Survey played a very big part in the development of that. Their maps, the county series maps, formed the basis for the numbering system, and as you can see, the red circles, I drew many of those in my day. On the hard copy maps were the record, the original record, and each site was numbered according to county map sheet number and then unique number. So each one had a file, and on the file, of course, we extracted the Ordnance Survey memoir input for each of the ancient monuments, because they had also recorded really good information, pre-famine information about the monuments, that information would probably have been lost, a lot of it, if it hadn't been recorded in the Ordnance Survey memoirs. So along with other antiquarians' accounts and modern reports, site visits and everything, each of the sites was given a file of its own, and these are now available to see online with digital development. Back in the days you'd have to open the drawer of the filing cabinet, but now they're accessible. So in 1991, the Archaeological Survey changed its name several times over the years. It became the Historic Monuments and Buildings branch, and they moved to Hill Street in Belfast, along with the actual buildings. The buildings branch, they'd been making records of buildings, and the Archaeological Survey had been making records of the archaeological monuments, and now they were all under one roof in Hill Street. And one of the other resources that was very useful to us from the Ordnance Survey again were the aerial photographs. We in those days we had to look through that old-fashioned looking gadget at the bottom, which is a stereoscope. The aerial photographs were made on runs for other reasons, not for archaeological reasons, but we were able to use them. There were all kinds of different reasons, and the Ordnance Survey had a great library of photographs that we could consult, not only to monitor existing archaeology, but to try to identify new sites that we didn't know had existed in the landscape. If you look on the top left, you see dark rings. It's just caused by differential drainage under certain conditions. It shows up in a field. So even where a monument has disappeared, it's no longer visible on the ground. You can see traces of it in the landscape from the air. So those were very useful to us as well. And many sites were, from aerial photographs, crop marks, are recorded in our database. So if you see any of those when you're looking, that's probably where they came from, along with other photos. So just in conclusion of my part of the talk, really there's hardly a day goes by in the course of our work when we don't consult either the Ordnance Survey memoirs or the Ordnance Survey historic maps. They provide a very good sort of evidence base in decision making, and they're very useful in all kinds of research and all kinds of work that we do. So I'll hand over to Hannah now, and I'll hand over that.
Hi everyone, so my name is Hannah and I'm also an archaeologist with HERoNI. I have also just recovered from COVID, so excuse me if I cough and splutter through this, but I am not contagious. So I'm just going to do a quick overview about how members of the public have been using our maps and Ordnance Survey maps to send us queries and information on potential new archaeological sites. So I joined HERoNI about 3 years ago, and I started to become part of a team that analysed public submissions and getting these added to the Sites and Monuments record. And in that time, so in just under 3 years, we have now added almost 1,000 new sites to the SMR. And a huge amount of these is thanks to members of the public like yourselves who have submitted queries through the HERoNI inbox. Most of these, as Rosemary mentioned earlier, are in the form of crop marks identified from orthophotography. So a lot of that can be from looking at the Historic Environment Map Viewer online and also looking at things like Google Earth images, and then comparing that to our databases and the map viewer. So I'm just going to discuss some of the best examples of these that have come through my email inbox and ones that we have added since 2021. So I know it's difficult today, but if you can cast your mind back to 2018, we actually had a lovely hot, dry summer. And this gave us perfect conditions for crop marks showing up very clearly. And it led to the discovery of hundreds of new sites across Ireland. This period of discovery became fondly known as Dronehenge, and some of the best known examples in Ireland were additional features that showed up near Newgrange. Social media and news outlets picked up on this and spread the word, and this sparked new interest in people across the country. And as a result, we've had some really fantastic submissions passed through to us at HERoNI. So if you ever fancy submitting a site, if you think you've spotted something, this is the process that it will go through. So we get an email from a member of the public. We have an administrative team who will do a cursory check of the historic maps and the Sites and Monuments record. If nothing is recorded and it looks like a new site, that information is then passed through to myself and my colleagues to investigate. Sometimes whenever we look at these sites and we look back at the historic Ordnance Survey maps, we can actually rule them out. Just as an example, here in the top right of the screen, you can see two little circular features there, and those are actually sheepfolds, just enclosures for sheep and cattle. But as well as ruling them out, the Ordnance Survey maps can also provide us with clues and extra evidence. For example, it's quite common to see field boundaries curving around to respect enclosures like grass. There's a combination of reasons for this. One of them is there is long-standing and is still standing superstition around destroying fairy forts. But there's also a lot more effort required to put a field boundary through a standing mound or enclosure, so it's much easier just to go around it. So it can give us extra evidence that something is an antiquity if we can see the field boundaries curving around to respect that. As Rosemary mentioned, the Ordnance Survey Memoirs are an invaluable tool in helping us to identify sites and helping us to build up an understanding of what characterised an area at the time that people were recording it. We would also look to compare orthophotography from across various years and also to examine LiDAR data where that's available, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. So nowadays we can gather a lot of information, including topography of the area, size of monuments and locational information without needing to leave our desks, and this really improves our efficiency in looking at these sites. Sometimes site visits or further research is beneficial to enhance our understanding and our descriptions of these, but we can do some really fantastic work now with desk-based technology. So here is an example of a crop mark that was submitted for review from a member of the public, and it looks to have the potential to be a subcircular enclosure. You can see it there on the right hand side. You can just about make out a dark ring, and on closer inspection it's maybe a bit difficult to see on the screen, but there is a faintly visible large circular crop mark immediately west of this. So whenever I began looking into this, I consulted the Sites and Monuments record and found that we had two unlocated Danish forts that were mentioned in the Ordnance Survey Memoirs. Several enclosures are recorded as Danish due to a minor popular obsession with the Vikings, although we know that rats probably did have some defensive elements which would have defended against Viking raids. we can't say with certainty that these crop marks represent the sites that are mentioned in the Ordnance Survey memoirs, but it is a possibility, and it's an improvement on the previous location that we had for them. So I then updated the Sites and Monuments record to reflect this. So in this instance, it just shows that the submission of new sites like this can help us to identify potential location for previously unlocated sites, so therefore improving and enriching the database and our understanding of the area by cross-referencing our available resources. Sometimes we get more unusual submissions, like this example here, and they might mirror sites which we already have recorded in the Sites and Monuments record. So this site is quite unusual in terms of its size and shape, and it stands out from several sites that would be submitted would be sort of 30 metres across circular crop marks. So I did a little bit of metaphorical digging to see if we could get any more information. And so the site that was submitted is in County Tyrone, and I found that there is a site recorded as Kerrie's Fort in County Armagh, which is recorded here on the first edition Ordnance Survey map. And you can see that there's some pretty striking similarities between the two. They're both quite large enclosures, and they're also very similar in terms of their shape and appearance. So although we can't state certainties without further archaeological evaluation, identifying potentially similar sites helps us to understand their distribution and other potential commonalities, like their size and their proximity to other archaeological sites and monuments. This is really beneficial from a research potential. People are able to analyse our data and to cross-reference and compare sites. And we know that we have people from around the world conducting research using the databases that we control at HERoNI, such as the Sites and Monuments record. We have a wealth of sites that are unique to this island, and these are of interest to people both locally and globally. So this next one, I don't think you have to be an archaeologist to see that there is something pretty spectacular going on here. This is a real standout site that was submitted by a member of the public, and it required a bit more research than your average circular crop mark. So this site is located a short distance west of Loch Brickland in a townland called Drumsalla. It's a very striking, large, multi-ditched, looks like hilltop enclosure, and with associated features. In some ways, it's reminiscent to Clocker Hill Fort in County Tyrone, but regardless of whether or not there's parallels to be drawn there, it's a really unusual and remarkable complex of crop marks. So when I began researching the site and looking for information on the townland, I came across this article from the Ulster Journal of Archaeology in 1989 about the rediscovery of a gold torque from the townland, and you can see the illustration of the torque. It's like a bangle up there. So the torque was originally found in Drumsalla in 1794 and came into the possession of the Bishop of Dromore, and was then rediscovered in a private collection in 1989 and is currently with a museum down south. Exactly where the torque was found is still unknown, other than we know it is in this townland, but given the potential for this multi-ditched enclosure to be a high status site, there's certainly a possibility that a high status item like the torque could be associated with it. So again, we can enhance our databases by tying together available resources, and although often we can only speculate, it can ultimately lead to a better chance of more fully understanding our past. So just to round this section off with a couple of really nice examples. On the left here, in County Derry, just outside Desert Martin, beside the Grangewater River, is this double-ditched enclosure. So this site is in an area which is actually quite sparse in terms of known archaeological sites and monuments. There was literally a gap in the map viewer, so this actually really helps to add to the narrative of the area and fill in somewhat of a gap in the archaeological record here. Then down at the bottom, again, don't have to be an archaeologist to see there's something pretty nice going on here. This is about 1.5 kilometres southwest of the Giant's Ring. So we already know that the Giant's Ring was a focal point for prehistoric ritual activity, and there's a recent publication by Barry Hartwell which shows the extensive prehistoric ritual landscape that surrounded the Giant's Ring. So this complex of crop marks is indicative of a ritual complex. We can see there's at least 2 ring ditch enclosures here and a number of possible barrows. So the smaller circular marks there are possible barrows, which are circular burial mounds, usually dating to the Bronze Age. So sites like this help to expand the existing prehistoric narrative of the area within the townland of Ballynahady and beyond, and it adds more credence to the theory that the area was a hotspot for prehistoric ritual activity. I should mention that not only is the identification of sites vital for enhancing the archaeological record and our knowledge, but the SMR and the Historic Environment Map Bureau are also vital resources in the planning process. So the more assets that are identified, the less risk there is that sites will be destroyed or go unrecorded when development works take place, as a lot of these sites have no above ground remains visible. The recording of these sites in the SMR enables a more targeted approach when it comes to considering planning applications and issuing archaeological conditions and ultimately protecting our historic environment. So I mentioned LiDAR earlier. This is a really exciting new feature that we added to the map viewer this year. This contains data from LiDAR survey work, which was previously carried out by HED. Although it doesn't cover the entirety of Northern Ireland, it covers small areas in each county, and we hope to expand this coverage in the future. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with LiDAR, it stands for Light Detection and Ranging. It's a remote sensing technology using lasers to measure variable distances to the Earth. This data can then be used to create 3D models of the Earth's surface and can provide detailed data for mapping and understanding archaeological landscapes. It's already proving to be a really valuable research tool, and we've had several new site submissions coming in through HERoNI. So these are two examples that I'm going to discuss. I actually think we have a gentleman in the room who identified the one on the right. The one on the left is from outside Downpatrick, and the one on the right is from near Slemish. So this site outside Downpatrick is, as you can see, not at all visible on orthophotography, on any year of orthophotography, and only appears on LiDAR. It's possibly a linear barrow cemetery. So as I mentioned earlier, barrows are Bronze Age burial mounds. This would be an excellent location for a barrow cemetery. It's on the crest of a hill overlooking a bend in watercourses to the east and to the west, so it has a really prominent position in the landscape, and this is quite typical of funerary and ritual sites. There's certainly two very clear circular features visible, potentially a third in the centre. It's a lot more truncated, but you can faintly make out the curve. And as I said, there is no trace of these otherwise, so without LiDAR, or unless there was an archaeological excavation there, it's unlikely that we would have ever known this site existed. So this next site then is just to the east of Slemish Mountain. Again, not observable on orthophotography and not recorded on Ordnance Survey maps, but it's an almost complete circular feature that we can see on the LiDAR imagery. It's a small enclosure. It only measures around 13 metres in diameter, so its exact purpose is unclear. It could be anything from a sheepfold to a ring ditch. But besides that, it's an intriguing location with its western and southern perimeter backing onto a stream. And this is the type of site that we would potentially visit for a closer look to try and gain more information on it. So if we zoom out and look at this site in context with the surrounding area, so this is the LiDAR coverage for the Slemish area, you can start to build up a picture of the landscape here in terms of archaeology and topography. It's a great example of how modern analysis tools like LiDAR can complement and enhance the existing archaeological record. It's also important to highlight that the map viewer and the addition of layers like LiDAR can provide an accessible option to people anywhere in the world who might not be able to physically visit sites but have a keen interest in archaeology and heritage. So a key takeaway is that you don't have to be involved in the excavation process to provide valuable information to the archaeological record. And then just to revisit one of Rosemary's slides from the beginning of this presentation, LiDAR data provides a great visual aid to compare against the historic Ordnance Survey mapping, in this example, Navan Fort. Whenever we look at how modern technology captures these sites, you can really appreciate the skill that these 19th century cartographers had and the detail and relative accuracy that they were able to record for these sites. So while assets like LiDAR help us to learn more, the work carried out by the Ordnance Survey remains an extremely valuable tool for helping us to understand landscapes as they were perceived in the 19th and 20th centuries. And just to round up on that last point, we still have a lot to learn from historic Ordnance Survey maps. There's always more to be found. Rosemary detailed the process of how sites were identified whenever the SMR was created, but we're all only human and we miss things. And now that these maps are hosted online and are publicly available, the chances of sites being found and picked up is much higher. So these are 3 examples of enclosures that were recorded on the first edition Ordnance Survey maps, but hadn't previously been added to the Sites and Monuments record. We can't, again, say what these enclosures are, but we can say that there were some upstanding remains at the time, and local knowledge and local tradition would have indicated to these cartographers that these were sites of significance and potential antiquity. So just before I pass over to Kerrie, just to sum up, it just goes to show the ongoing value of the original Ordnance Survey work and how we can continue to use it to further our knowledge and to understand our historic and prehistoric landscapes. So I'm now going to pass over to Kerrie, who's going to talk about the features and functionality of the map viewer.
Morning or afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Hannah and Rosemary. I hope you found their talks as interesting and as informative as I did. Unlike Rosemary and Hannah, I'm not an archaeologist, I'm a geographer. I work for Ordnance Survey, but I've been outposted to HED for the last 8 years under the Northern Ireland Mapping Agreement. So for my part today, as Hannah said, I'd like to introduce you to our historic environment map viewer. It was first launched in 2016, but it's recently been redeveloped onto a new platform, and I'd like to give credit to my colleague James Bamford, I think is here today. James did the redevelopment work whilst I was on maternity leave last year. So on the new map viewer, we do have some better functionality, but we also have some fantastic new resources available on there, as Hannah has already touched on. So we've been talking today about how the Ordnance Survey historic maps are a vital resource in enriching the records held by HERoNI, but until this year there was actually a fairly significant number of gaps in the digital coverage of the 6-inch historic maps. So last year I launched a project to fill in these gaps, and that involved tracking down physical copies of the map sheets, scanning these where necessary and processing them so that they could be integrated into the existing digital map layers. I have to give credit to my NIMA colleague Samantha Boyle, is here today. Samantha undertook most of the work on this project. She did the majority of the research, the scanning and the processing for the project, so thank you, Samantha. Also thanks again to James, who kept the project going whilst I was on maternity leave. And finally, I mentioned to the Spatial NI team in OSNI, who were doing the work to process the maps and making them available on the map viewer. So delighted to say that we now have full coverage for Northern Ireland for the first edition 6-inch historic maps on the map viewer. For the later editions as well, this is coming soon. Spatial and I are just finishing in the final stages of processing these layers. The LiDAR then as well, Hannah's already mentioned that the LiDAR surveys are now available on the map viewer, and they're valuable they've been invaluable for the research and enrichment of the SMR. We've got 39 survey areas that have been processed and hillshades made available for the public, and these are so quick and easy to access on the map viewer. Just last week, HED launched the new Defence Heritage Record, and this contains information on the many 20th century defensive structures that are dotted around the countryside and coast of Northern Ireland. So on the map viewer you can find details of over 4,500 sites that were constructed across the country in response to World War I and II, and also for the Cold War. So I'm pleased to say that this is a really high quality data set, and the fine thing about this layer in particular is that any images that were taken during the course of the survey, they're also readily available on the map viewer in a one-stop shop for all of that. And finally, I just want to mention a relatively new resource on the map viewer, and that's the excavations layer. So in Northern Ireland, any archaeological excavations, they're subject to licence that is issued by HED. And on our map viewer, we have information available on the location of the archaeological excavations. We also have a layer showing the test trench layout and the area covered. We also have made available the final excavation report and these are available for excavations dating back to the year 2000. And I'd like to give credit to my colleague Jordan Breslin, he's here today I think. Jordan did most of the work in creating this geospatial data set, so credit to Jordan because there was a lot of hard work went into that. So now I'm going to give you a quick demo of the map viewer. Bear with me, I completely chickened out of doing a live demo, so I've done a screen recording, so hopefully it goes okay. The first thing you'll see when you access the map viewer is the welcome splash screen. And I'd like to draw your attention to the subscribe button. As Stephen mentioned at the start there, HERoNI hosts many interesting events and lectures throughout the year. So if you're interested in these or you want to hear more about them, I'd encourage you to subscribe to the HERoNI mailing list. Now when you land on the HED map viewer, you can find the user guide up in the top left hand corner, and you can also find some further information on HERoNI and the records that we have available. Now we have a fairly large number of data sets available on our map viewer, and these can be toggled off and on in the layers list. And at the top of the list is the all-important sites and monuments record we've been discussing today. And you can see just how vast this record is when you can visualize it on a map like this. So if you click on any of the points, in the site, you'll see the pop-up and you'll get some information. But if you click on the link to the SMR database, this is where you'll access all of that information that Rosemary was talking about in her part there earlier, and that includes the images and maps. Also in the layers list then, you find the Defence Heritage Record that I mentioned was launched just last week. And it contains data on over 4,500 sites that were surveyed over a 2-year period from 2020 to 2022. And if I zoom down in just for an example down to Bishop's Court to show you, if you click on any point on the map, you'll see a pop-up, and you'll be able to dock this over to the side of your screen just to make it easier to view. And you can see there all of that quality information that was collected during the survey, as well as any images that were taken. They're all there in that one-stop shop. I'm going to show you now then archaeological excavations layers as well. And yet again, yet another large data set covering the whole of Northern Ireland. And just for an example then, we'll go up to the north coast, up to Ballycastle. Quite a few excavations have taken part in the town here. And if I just select any of the sites there, the pop-up will come up again. You'll find a summary of the excavation, a couple of other bits of information, but and more importantly, you'll find the full report on that excavation there as a PDF attachment. Moving on then, I'm going to show you where you can find those LiDAR surveys that Hannah was talking about. Look how quickly those have loaded. You can add the SMR layer on there. As Hannah had said, you can view the sites that have already been recorded in that survey area. And of course then the Ordnance Survey historic maps. So I've switched on here the first edition of the 6-inch maps. And as I've said already, I'm really delighted that we now have full coverage for this map on our map viewer. So I'm going to move on then and show you some more of the other bits of functionality that are on the map viewer. We'll start with the basic search bar. You can search for almost anything here. So you can from a site type or a site name or a record number or even an address. But Rosemary and Hannah both mentioned Navan Fort, so let's see if we can find it. We just click on the hit from the Sites and Monuments record, and the map will zoom to that location. And if I zoom out slightly, then the first edition map will start to load. And as Hannah touched on then, you can see the sites in the surrounding landscape, and they're layered on top of the first edition map. Now, if you'd really like to delve into the data a bit further, you'll probably find the table function most valuable. And this is where you'll find all of the data on the HERoNI records that are published on the map viewer. But for now, we'll just stick with the Sites and Monuments record. And you can see at the bottom of the table there are a total of 18,301 records on the SMR. Now the search bar within the table is a good way to apply a simple filter to the data. So for example, I want to find information on megalithic tombs. So the results will come up instantly. You can see there we've got 644 records within the SMR. And if I minimise the window here and I zoom out a little bit, you'll see that on that map now is just the results from that search is all that appears on the map viewer now. So it's filtered out all of the other sites from the record. And this makes it easy to identify spatial patterns on the map then too. But if you want to get down into the data a little bit further, you can also set a filter to extract information that you're looking for. And you click on the actions icon in the table, and this is where you can set a filter. So you just need to toggle on the sites and monuments layer, as I know this is what I want to filter. And then I want to add my filter. So for example, today, I'm going to find the megalithic tombs in the SMR that are scheduled, and as Rosemary said, that means that they have statutory protection if they are scheduled. So first I'll ask it to extract the megalithic tombs from the SMR. And then I'll I want to add another question where I want to ask it to give me all of the sites from the megalithic tombs that their protection is scheduled. And you can see results again there instantly. We have 219 scheduled megalithic tombs on the SMR. And if I minimise the windows again, you can see that the data has filtered down even further. So all you have there are the scheduled megalithic tombs on the SMR. So for the next example then, the next functionality on the map, I'm going to go down to Newry just for example. And one of the next function I'm going to show you is the swipe tool. And this can be used to layer your maps one on top of the other, and then you can really easily compare them. So if you toggle that on in the wee window there, so your leading layer is your top layer, and in this case I want to keep the first edition map on top. So it's already checked, I'm going to leave that on. And your trailing layer is the one that's underneath. So in this case I want to keep the modern OSNI based map, so I'm going to turn off the first edition map there. And all you have to do then is click and drag, and as I peel the top map back, you can easily compare it to the modern map underneath. And this, well, for me, is where I really appreciate the accuracy of those maps that were surveyed 200 years ago. And when you're finished with the swipe tool then, you can just switch it off and close the window down, and you'll be back there to where you started. So a few other handy functions then on the map viewer. You've got your bookmarks function if you want to pick up where you left off. You also have a handy tool here that you can find the coordinates of a location, and you can get them in TM65 or in WGS84. You also have the ability to draw on the map as well. And the final thing then, just to point out, is the very useful measuring tool up in the top right hand corner. So you can measure straight line distances, you can measure area, and you can also change your units on there too. So there's a lot more to show on there, but that was just a quick run through of the map viewer, but there's so much more that you can do on it. So I'm going to finish off here now. I just want to say that most of our data that's on our map viewer is also available to consume as a service or to download in various formats. So it's on the DFC HED website, it's also on Open Data NI and on Sun Spatial NI as well. And I just want to say as well that all the data is updated on, the map viewer is updated on a monthly basis. And I think Hannah said earlier that we are all human, and when you're dealing with such a large amounts of data, errors will always creep in, so please do get in touch with us if you have anything that you'd like to feedback. Thank you.
So the last talk was charting our past, this talk's surveying our past, and the next talk's going to be tracing our past. And I'd like to say this was all planned, but it actually emerged purely by accident, rather than by design. For those of you not familiar about PRONI, we are the official archive for Northern Ireland. We were established in 1923 by Public Record Act. We have a remit to take records from government, from public bodies, and from private, and we can take private records as well, which makes us a one-stop shop for archives in Northern Ireland. We have about 3 million records, and they can range from the shopkeeper to big businesses, schools, to councils, etc. And our oldest document is a papal bull dated 1219. which alas relates to a church in Scotland rather than Northern Ireland. But we have plenty 14th century material relating to Ulster. So what's on the PRONI historical map sphere? 1,500 historical Ordnance Survey maps covering the 6-day counties of present-day Northern Ireland from 1832 to 1986. We have 4,000 aerial orthography images, 600 sheets of LPS base mapping, and 12,000 points of historical interest themed under the following headings: religion, education, schools, health, and as of yesterday, we have places of worship. And we have 16,000 historic and archaeological sites and monuments, which is an overlap with the HED map viewer. So why would you use the PRONI historical map viewer? You use it to browse. And compared to holding a map, this is a much easier way to use maps. You know, you're not confined by the boundaries of one particular map. To search, we added the facility to search by townland, parish, or town, city, or even using postal address, and to compare historical OS maps. And I suppose this is actually probably its greatest strength as a comparison site, to find landmarks and buildings of historical interest, and to discover the 16,000 historic monuments and sites of HERoNI. So, this is the current PRONI website, and you can, that's historic map viewer there. It takes you to this page where you can find out about the viewer, or you can search. So you go and search, and then we start. I should just note at this point, there is a video of a lot of what I'm going to say on YouTube, which tells you how to use historic maps viewer. So if you don't remember anything that I tell you today, you can go home and consult the viewer, the YouTube video. I'd also want to highlight there is help functionality. Now, Kerrie did show you some of the help functionality on the HED map viewer. There's help functionality also in the PRONI viewer, and pretty much that covers most of what you want to know. So if you ever get stuck, just hit the help. Okay, so I'm going to show you how you can browse and how you can search. So browse literally is a zoom into the county, into the city, and that is pretty much does what it says on the tin. To search by place name, you have to put a name in. In this case, I'm putting Downpatrick in. It's taking us to Downpatrick. Now, this wee toggle you can open up, and it'll give you a bit more detail. Now, those are the two main ways in: browse, search. I'm now going to give you a case study, and this case study is my case study, by the way. And what I'm trying to do is show how an ordinary person can use this. You know, you don't have to be an academic. You don't have to work in an Ordnance Survey. So I did a search for Ballyholme, which is where I'm from, in Bangor. And that's the modern map. I'm going to go back to a previous base map, and I want to highlight, this is where I grew up, in Windmill Road. And do you see this road here? It's called Bellevue. Now, I, as a 7-year-old, always wondered why the windmill was in Bellevue and not on Windmill Road. And these are sort of things that keep you up awake at night when you're 7. And so I thought I'd go back and look at some of the earlier maps. So that's what the windmill looks today. It is a house. It's a 3-story house, and people live in it. So going back again, here we have Windmill Road here, And Bellevue, which was the whole length here, you can see is only half a road, and this is where the windmill was. Also of interest, probably to me and nobody else, is there's a road called Grove Park here, and the hill is called Grove Hill, and I never knew that until I looked at the map. So I'm giving an example of local history that you can only really find out either from oral history or from maps. This is the same. It shows the Bellevue as it was intended. That's the windmill there. And then we're back into the 19th century maps, and that's kind of explains the whole thing. There only is one road, which is Windmill Road, and the windmill access from a lane coming from the road. So that, looking back, would have given me less sleepless nights had I known that. And that's the windmill as it was and is today. So I suppose what it demonstrates is a couple of things, and it's the growth of the urban landscape, you know, and how it's changed. I suppose the locality from something that it wasn't, and you see this all the time with place names, you know, which don't make a lot of sense. But if you go back, look in maps, suddenly it does make sense. You can search by townland, and I've picked one called Edenderry because there's a lot of Edenderries, you know. So in this one, I'm going to choose the Edenderry from Jumbo, and here again we have the detail in a message box. Now that's a modern map. As I said, we've got 5 sets of historical maps to look back at, and that's one of the older ones. We have a slider function which allows us to compare maps. I think Kerrie did a slide on it. So that's the modern one compared with the older one. Again, very useful to see the difference in topography. Other features we can do, that's it compared, that's 2 maps compared, and they're the 2 19th century maps. And then again, we've got aerial photographs, so we can sort of see what the terrain looked like. And the slider, I'm not going to do this live. The slider can slide right over that way, or it can slide that way. I can do that in both the 2 areas. This is 2 Titanic Boulevard, so I thought it'd be interesting to see what 2 Titanic Boulevard looked like in the past. And this is what's called, there's different types of base maps, and this base map is a fusion light, which kind of just gives the outline. But you can see where PRONI is on the fusion outline map. And then again, it's not a contemporary aerial photography map, as you can see, but we were already built at this time. And as you can see, the detail is up in the box. And you can sort of, this must be, we must have just moved in at this point, because the arc apartments are there, but the Met College isn't. And that's another look, again, with just the key features and no description. Now, this is one of the earlier maps in the 20th century. Again, we're going to zoom in, and we can use the points of interest. And the points of interest are health, which are nearly always border guardians or hospitals, even the poorhouse, law courts, religious churches and graveyards, schools, it says what it is on the tin, and the monuments and sites, they're borrowed from the HERoNI one. And this one here is new, as of yesterday. places of worship. And I just want to finish by showing you what the places of worship data set will look like. We've only put a sample up to try and get the data properly right. And so we've got about 900 churches up. There's a fair bit more, which are going to go on over the next few months. So I did a search for Ballymallard Methodist, and this is Ballymallard Methodist here. And you see it's one of 4, so there's 4 different slides. So the first slide provides the information. Depending what browser you're looking at, it comes out differently. This is how it came out in my browser. But it gives you details of the building number, the street, the townland. It gives you all the pointer information, the local council, it's whether it's built, it's approved, and the key point, there's 2 key points here. This is the start date, 1826, that's end date 1904. So this is a church that doesn't exist anymore. And the other point, which from PRONI's point of view, we really want to sell, is it gives you the PRONI church reference. So, macro from 1E bar 23, 1E bar 37, and those are the records that you would look for when you come into Northern Ireland, which is really the most important thing we wanted from this data set. Now, that was the first church on that site. There's a successor church, and most of the detail is the same, though we have additional information like the URL, which will take you to the website. We also have the date start in 1904. It's now current, so it's still in existence. And again, the records themselves. So coming soon, we will sort of finish off that. We've got some other maps which have been digitized, which we hope to get on the website, onto the platform in due course. And like everything else, we will have to migrate to a new platform at some point, which is something people don't tell you when you get historical viewers or indeed web apps, that they don't last forever. Any questions?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Stephen, for inviting me. Fantastic to be here. Fantastic to see so many people in the room who are interested in maps, like ourselves. So yes, I'm basically the Chief Survey Officer for Ordnance Survey and the Director of Mapping. So the title of my talk, I suppose, states then I'm going to look at, I suppose, reflect a little bit on the rich history of Ordnance Survey, but also to touch right through to some of our current activities. So to condense 200 years into 20 minutes isn't really possible, so it's literally a few little snippets of information that hopefully you'll find interesting. So a little bit of a timeline, pulling out some key dates. Ordnance Survey was set up in 1791 to create maps basically for the south of England when they were concerned about basically the military fearing an attack from France by Napoleon, and that's what kicked off what's known now as Ordnance Survey Great Britain. But at Ordnance Survey in Ireland, the driver was completely different. It was to enable the creation of a fairer tax system. So the county cess tax at the time was based on the rateable value of the land, which goes back to the Griffiths valuation, a neat segue. But the areas of the land weren't really, I suppose, very well mapped. In some cases, they were actually using information and maps from 1630, so wasn't accurate at all. The landowning gentry who were being, I suppose, rated on top of these not very great, I suppose, data, they complained loudly, and that triggered a number of parliamentary committees in England. And the Spring Rice Committee of 1824 is the one that basically recommended that Ireland should be surveyed and basically remapped, but at a hugely detailed scale of 6 inches to 1 mile, of which no country in the world was mapped to such a level at that time, and basically said that Ordnance Survey of Great Britain should extend their remit. So the 22nd of June, Ordnance Survey Ireland was created. Hence, here we are 200 years later. So the timeline of our major achievements along here is quite astonishing for some of the firsts. So we were the first country in the world to have uniform levelling, geodetic levelling of our height. We were the first country by the time the 6-inch series was finished in 1846 to be mapped at a series of 6-inch to 1 mile. We were the first national mapping agency in Europe to embark on full digitisation of our data, and in 2015 we moved to a fully cartographic model of our data, and those are the three areas that we're going to talk about. The other significant first is first ever female chief survey officer in over 100 years, so no pressure, no pressure. And I'm definitely not going to be the last, I'll tell you that. So Thomas Colby was appointed as the Director General, the chap on the left here in the photo, the Director General of Ordnance Survey, to lead the mapping of the Survey of Ireland, and he did that for 22 years, from 1824 to 1846. He met and married his wife while he was here. She was the daughter of the Treasurer of Derry. The bureau on the right, actually, I received this photograph earlier in the year from a colleague in Ordnance Survey Great Britain, where some of Thomas Colby's relations contacted them to ask could they come and visit, and they came with photographs and some of Colby's items. They actually had his compass, and this was his bureau, and it actually had the provenance documents and the invoice inside it. So the receipt showed it was made by Scott and Paisley in Stafford Street in Dublin. It was delivered in July 1929, and it cost £13 and 13 shillings, and it's still actually used by one of the members of the family. So although they gave him they handed over some of the things, they're obviously keeping that. It may still head that direction, but fantastic to still have it, and fantastic for them to have called in. And I suppose, although Ordnance Survey, we're always very forward-looking, we're changing, we're looking at how we can do things better and smarter and faster, we're also extremely proud of the roots that we have, stretching back 200 years, and the groundbreaking work that was carried out at that time. And just a little side point here, that I suppose that's why then our previous building that Ordnance Survey headquarters from 1985 until about, I think it was maybe 2012, we left it. But it was named after Thomas Colby House. It didn't look like this when we were in it. When we left, it was revamped, and you might now recognise it as where the statisticians now reside, the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency, so the place where you go to register births. But fantastic that the name was kept, and it's still known as Colby House up in Stranmillis. So a little bit of what happened back at the time when Thomas Colby was asked to map the country to such a level of detail. It was a huge task, and to get such a detailed scale and to map it accurately, he needed to create what's known as a triangulation network, and that's basically how he was going to work out scale and distance for the whole area of the island of Ireland. So he searched many places. There are stories of him climbing mountains here, there and everywhere to have a look around. And he actually picked the McGilligan area of Lough Foyle. This is Lough Foyle just on the left. You can see McGilligan tip there as the perfect location to create a baseline. So he had Benevena Mountain in the background and a really, really flat piece of land. So the principle of triangulation is basically if you know the distance between 2 points and you know the angle, then basically the angle from each point to that third, if you measure all of those, you work out all of the distances and all of the angles using trigonometry. So it's basically a network of triangles, and you can see some of the little lines here coming from the red dots. So all of the points had to be visible, so they were taken from the hill on the mountain tops. So they would climb Benevena, climb some of the mountains over in Donegal, and actually look backwards along the line that they had measured. So basically the north of the line was connected to Jura and Islay in Scotland, and the south was connected to Slieve Snocht and Knockglade. So the red dots here are actually the base towers that were created, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. But basically, what Colby did along this line, the red line here, which is about 7.89 miles, was measure it really, really, really accurately. It took 60 men 7 days to measure this. This is a sketch of them actually doing the work. So they used bars, iron bars, to measure the distances. They were covering those to keep them protected from the elements. This image was actually drawn by Sir John Herschel, and he was the president of the Royal Astronomical Society. And Thomas Colby invited him over to help check their calculations. And he also invited Charles Babbage, who was a mathematician who helped invent the first mechanical computer. He visited as he was a friend of Colby's, and again, double checking all of their calculations. And at the time, the iron bars that were used to measure these distances, they created errors due to expansion and contraction in the coal, probably more contraction here rather than expansion. But for every 4 degrees change in Fahrenheit, that caused 1 foot error over 8 miles. So you're trying to measure really accurately and trying to, how do we work with these bars? So Colby actually invented a new compensating bar. So he basically had a bar of iron and a bar of brass, and he had them linked in the centre with a little compensation point at the end. So as one expanded or contracted, that little measure would move a little bit, and he could work out that distance and then take it off the distance. These became really, really important. Colby's bars became famous. They were actually used then to create a baseline in Calcutta for the Great Survey of India, and in South Africa in 1939 at Cape Town for the first ever baseline to be measured in Africa. So this piece of work here was of huge significance. As I said, it took 70 men 60 days to measure it. They had to cross the River Roe as they were going as well, trying to keep those bars straight and level. And when it was remeasured in 1960, they were less than 1 inch out over 7.89 miles, which is absolutely amazing. So here you can see the connections. You can see the little kind of darker coloured line at the top, which is that Lochfoyle baseline. And this was known as the principal triangulation of Ireland. So it meant that every distance measured on the island, and actually in across the water as well in England, originated from here. And this was the baseline for over 100 years, about 120 years, until there was the secondary triangulation of Ireland happened. Every single distance measured in England and Ireland related back to that Lochfoyle base point. So you might have seen, as you walked in, there's a little brochure. If you didn't get one, there's some sitting outside there, the Lochfoyle baseline, which will give you an awful lot more detail than what I'm skimming over here. And that was written by Kerrie, one of our ex-chief survey officers as well. But basically, the principal triangulation, every distance came from here, and the triangles that they used, I suppose, they were measured using theodolites that were 2 and 3 feet in diameter that had to be carried up to the top of the mountains to calculate those angles looking down along the baseline. So really precision instruments for measuring, I suppose, both horizontal and vertical angles. And as I said then, by the time they finished doing this, the principal triangulation, Ireland was the most detailed mapped country in the world at the time. How do we do it now? We basically use satellites to help us create those triangles and how we measure where we are. We still use a type of theodolite known as a total station, but it measures angles and distances, and it records the information all together. So I suppose today, instead of having to establish that network of triangles to work out where we are, we can receive signals from satellites in the form of a GPS signal that comes down. Our equipment uses the same technology basically as the sat-nav in your car, but to much greater accuracy that will give the position to our surveyors, location within about 1 centimetre or 2. So going back to those red dots on my original slide, those red dots signify the base towers. So these were points that were strategic along that line where they marked exactly where they were in terms of the baseline. And inside these, I suppose, base towers. Right in the centre, there's a tiny dot. There's a little piece of wire, and that marks the exact point of where they measured over at that point in time. What they did was then build these massive structures around it to protect it. They put earth mounds on top. They covered it with a sort of a concrete cap, and then put railings around the top. So out of the 4 base stations that were built, 3 still exist. So 2 are on private land, and the bottom one, I suppose the most southerly one, is publicly available. So it's just behind the Drummond Hotel in Ballykelly. So if you're ever passing through Ballykelly, you can go around the back of the Drummond Hotel. There's a little sort of park area, a pitch there, and you'll be able to see one of these base towers sitting there. Unfortunately, the most northerly base tower up at McGilligan eroded into the sea. So the last little bit of it you can see on the top right there, and you can't see that anymore. We're not really certain when that photo was taken. Probably, judging by their attire, maybe 60s or so. A few retirees in the audience might remember. Is that you, Chris?
Probably around the
70s maybe? Okay. So 70s, that was visible. It's not visible anymore now. So whether it's just been buried by sand, whether it's still there, whether it's broken up further and out at sea, we're not sure. But it's a fascinating story, and this is a really good photo of one of them because you can see Benevan in the background, so you can see the height behind it. So a bit of legacy features that are still there, and that tell the fantastic story of what actually happened here 200 years ago. So the staff, when you reflect on that work that was carried out, I suppose you automatically think, when you think of Ordnance Survey, you think of a surveyor. But to me, they were much more than surveyors. When you delve into that history, there were mathematicians, artists, innovators of Colby coming up with those designs, problem solvers, are we going to cross the River Row, and things like that. So the list goes on, but it really was an era of scientific innovation that actually led the way in mapping and helped map other parts of the world. So the second thing I'm going to talk about is, I suppose, jumping forward a lot. Ordnance Survey were the first national mapping agency in Europe to actually start to digitise our maps. So this was in the mid-1980s. The original maps, as you know, were all, I suppose, artistically crafted. They were pen and ink, and they really were artists that created them. We then moved to, on the left-hand side here, a form of scribing. That was in about 1960s, about 1961 or so. And that was basically tracing off. You used a sapphire point to make what was called a fair drawing. So you were actually scratching out. It's those maps where you go, well, I visited here and I visited there, and you scratch out, you know, the gold colour of it or whatever. So they were scratching out the lines of the buildings, and the idea of that was that sapphire point made that line perfect. It was the exact thickness, the exact width, rather than you drawing it with a pen. But then that was photographed, easy for me to say, it was converted basically into a film positive, and then all the textual information and stuff was added manually before it was actually printed then. But we moved to a digital conversion program starting in 1985, basically taking all of that information, putting them onto what's called a digitizing table in the middle there, which was a digital table that you had to basically draw over and trace over all of the bits of the maps, and it converted every single one of the drawn points into a digital point. The problem was that you didn't know until overnight when I suppose it printed out what mistakes you had made. So you were literally digitizing blind, hoping you've copied everything. You found the bits the next day that you actually had to fix. 1985, this is 1956, which is a wee bit further back, but that was a 5 megabyte hard drive being loaded onto a plane. And I suppose your standard phone now, you're looking at about, you know, your average phone, 64 gigabytes is about 12,000 times the amount of storage. So in 1985 in Colby House at the time, we were getting our hardware delivered. Our main reason for moving to Colby was because we were going digital and we needed a new building for this. So basically Windows had to come out in order to get the equipment in. I can't even imagine what size that was, but I imagine it was maybe like a couple of megabytes, I don't know, at the time. But that move precipitated all of that going digital. And I suppose from then to now, we are constantly trying to look at how do we capture the information better and quicker and create that accurate representation of the world. These are some of the technology changes. On the left is an A8 stereo plotter. I think you saw, was it Rosemary earlier, showed the little viewer where you could look at two different images that we've collected. This was that stereo plotter. You put the two negatives of the photos up into the two little bits under the kind of upside down bowls. And then you spun all these different wheels to, while you were looking through a little piece in the middle to try to get it exactly accurate, that the two images overlapped enough that you could start to see them in stereo and actually see a little bit of 3D. And then there were tracings from that. So we still have one of them that's sitting in Lanyon Plaza at the moment. It looks a bit like an anti-aircraft gun to me, but it is quite. But basically, that technology is now the same on the right-hand side. So that's basically the screen where we can put those images up and put on a pair of stereo glasses, and there you go. So a lot smaller and a lot easier to run with. We're driven by changes as well in terms of the mapping we produce, in terms of what customers want. So I suppose in the 80s or so, when tourism was really kicking off and people were starting to drive about, created road atlases became more important. And then also the town series maps. People wanted to look at street maps. They needed to know where to park. If they drove into town, we had to have the car parks and capture all that type of information. And then there was also the whole tourism boom as well, of people starting to go out and about and creating bespoke maps of the moorings and places like that for people to go and visit. But basically our role is becoming more important. I feel that the impact of location and knowing where things are, we can all do it now on our phones, so everything is driven by location. So we've got to be on the ball. This was a quote from the United Nations Geospatial Information Framework, that all of this digital mapping basically is becoming a critical component of national infrastructure and a knowledge economy, blueprint of where and the means to integrate a variety of government services. And that's where we're going to move on now to how we've moved, I suppose, right up to the modern world of our new mapping. And that, I think Stephen mentioned it earlier, fusion mapping. So up until 2015, all of our maps were done in sheets, in squares. We updated those sheets, a bit like the 6 series sheets. We had divided the country into sheets and people were given a sheet, and that was what was updated. This move now is to we don't have sheets anymore, so we don't have those issues with corners of sheets. This is just covers all of Northern Ireland. Every single thing is covered by either a piece of water, a piece of land, or a piece of road. And every single part of our data now basically has a unique identifier linked to it. So it doesn't look very user-friendly, but that's an example. It's a 36 alphanumeric character that is linked to every single parcel of land and every single building and every single corner and edge of our property, or what we have mapped, I suppose. And we map the change, so we'll basically know when a field has changed, when it's halved in size, when a building has appeared or disappeared. So we've got timestamps on it, and we've got the ability to then start linking more information to it. So we called it fusion specifically for the fact of you're trying to pull information together, especially within government. What information do we have that links to that land parcel? And what information do we have that links to a building? So it's a bit like it's making our maps, as I heard the other day, somebody say, more sticky. So it's kind of like a sticky map, stick other stuff to it virtually. But that's where we're going, and where we are at the moment. We're also moving to new technology of how to capture this information. We have a mobile mapping unit, a bit like the Google camera that will go round, but it'll collect point clouds of data and images. So you can see Scrabo Tower over on the right here, that was captured by our drone, our UAV drone at the bottom. So it literally is just a series of dots, a point cloud of information that's created that. It looks like a photograph, but it's not. It's actually each dot. So new technology and creating new products from that, again, due to customer demand. And you'll have seen some of the uses internally or throughout today of the different map viewers and stuff that are available, but I suppose I just wanted to highlight some of the other wider uses within government of our information, some that's available for you to look at. So there's flood maps, Northern Ireland, so this is present day surface water. So you can go and zoom, look up, you can look up all the different scenarios of sea level rise, depending on where you're living, and if you want to move to somewhere. The other one that we've got is, I suppose, where our intelligent mapping comes in. This is the Education Authority using our mapping to work out distance to school and whether somebody's eligible for free school transport. So it's taking that mapping, rather than it being I think it used to take about 4 or 5 weeks. You would fill in a paper application. My kid wants to go to this school. Are we eligible or not? 4 weeks later, they would come back with a no or a yes. Whereas this is quite instant now, where you do it all online as a parent. You type in your your postcode, your home address. You type in the school, and it will work out that route and the distance to each door, and will let you know automatically then whether you're eligible for free school transport or not. So a lot of, I suppose, hidden uses as well as top level uses. Another one is our within land and property services. So we've got non-domestic revaluation. And for the first time ever, this was always a paper-based exercise, but it's actually now all online and all publicly available. So for a hairdresser somewhere looking at their valuation, they might go, well, they're not really overly happy with that, but they can go and find 10 other hairdressers in the same area or around them, see what they're paying, and actually help work that out as a comparison. So an awful lot more less complaints coming through, or people querying their bills. They can have a look themselves and go, well, you can still query it after that, but they might maybe go, okay, well, I'm happy enough with that. Another one is basically a viewer that's open to everybody, is spatialni.gov.uk. It was mentioned, I think, briefly earlier, and in that, any member of the public can go in and look at all of our data. So you can look at all of our large-scale mapping. You can just zoom in on areas, as Stephen was showing earlier, and we've all of our most up-to-date aerial photography. So it takes us at the moment 3 years to fly Northern Ireland to capture all of our aerial photography, and that is simply due to the weather. It only takes us 30 days that are clear with blue skies to do it, but every year to capture a third of the country, to get those 30 days it's not good. So, but that's what it is. It's our I suppose our return on that at the moment. And I'm just going to move into one final piece, I suppose, of where we've gone, where we come from, where we are now, and then this is a little bit of where we actually want to go to. If this plays, let me see. A little video. The whirly wheel. Okay, so that's our next main, I suppose, challenge to move to 3D of where we want to go. So moving from those little squares where you look at it on the map right up into a 3D world and a 3D environment. So it's going to take us time, but that's our next main mission. Maybe in 200 years' time, people will be going, well, there was this ginger-haired woman and she said that we're going to move to 3D. It'll either have gone very well or very badly. So just a few acknowledgements to the McCarroll's mapping monuments work. And there's also a book, and I'm going to plug as well for Finian O'Connell has written a book this year on the origins of Ireland's Ordnance Survey, and that's gone back in great detail into those parliamentary committees and what actually happened in that Spring Rice committee meeting. But on that note, I'm going to finish, and thank you very much for listening. So.